Good afternoon. Our next presentation, Data Centricity at Speed and Scale. Correction. Our next topic is Relevant Deep Sensing at the Edge with Lieutenant General Laura Potter, HQDA G2, Mr. Alex Miller, HQDA G2, Mr. Mark Kitts, PEO, IEWNS, and Mr. Michael Monteleone, APNT CFT.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here to talk about a topic that I am incredibly excited about. So some of you may have heard the Secretary of the Army's remarks this morning where she talked about the battlefield of 2030 and where we're headed with multi-domain operations. And the idea that we need to be able to sense more, persistently, and deeper than an adversary on the future battlefield. And that is in fact what this forum is designed to talk to you about. My name is Laura Potter. I am the G2 of the United States Army and lead the Army Intelligence and Security Enterprise. And as the Army is in the midst of its biggest modernization in 40 years, so too is the Intelligence and Security Enterprise. We talk about the idea of being data-centric, and some of you may have heard the last panel where there was a lot of discussion on data. But to be a data-centric military that understands its adversary and can gain overmatch of that adversary, you need the data. And to have that data, you need a multi-layered sensing strategy that is optimized. Within the Army Intel and Security Enterprise, that strategy consists of 3 layers and a foundation. And I am so appreciative of what industry and our partners in the military across the Joint Force and our allies and partners are doing to help us in this space. But we have a lot of work left to do. So our strategy has 3 layers and a foundation. The space layer, optimizing what we can get from government or commercial things on orbit, an aerial layer that includes manned and unmanned platforms from the stratosphere to the mid to high altitude layer that is optimized with sensors for a high-end adversary, to the ground layer, the terrestrial layer, where we need sensing at echelon, all underpinned by a foundation. And that foundation has to have the right transport at every classification level. It has to have the right analytics so that from the point of that sensor on the edge all the way back to that young man or woman under incredible amount of pressure to deliver intelligence at speed, that those soldiers are optimized to deliver the intelligence they need for commanders at echelon. And that is no small task. So we've got a lot of great intelligence initiatives that we want to talk to you about, and we have 3 expert panelists that are joining you today, and they're going to field all your very hard questions. So I'm going to start by introducing the Army G2 Science and Technology Leader. He runs all of our S&T efforts, both in terms of early developmental ideas that we work with on industry, all the way up through the systems that we acquire. So I'd like to introduce to you now Mr. Alex Miller.
Okay, awesome. Hey, thanks, ma'am. Hey, good afternoon. I'm actually going to speak last because it is my pleasure to introduce 2 engineers who I actually grew up with in the Army as Army engineers. So first is Mr. Mark Kitts. He is the Program Executive Officer for the PEO Intelligence, Electronic Warfare, and Sensors. And next is Mr. Mike Monteleone, who is the Director of the Assured Position, Navigation, Timing, and Space Cross-Functional Team under Army Futures Command. So I'm actually going to turn over to Mr. Kitts first, then Mr. Monteleone, and then I will go last. So Mark, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And it's been a long time since somebody's called me an engineer, and so I'm gonna take that later and be really excited about that. I hope everybody's doing well today. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. As Alex mentioned, I'm the PEO for Intelligence, Electronic Warfare, and Sensors. And very related to this, as we deliver our sensors on every platform in the Army, and as the Secretary mentioned earlier today, and the Army's effort to see and sense deep falls directly into my PEO's ability to deliver sensors, but also critically, our ability to deliver the data those sensors are collecting. And so I'm going to talk a few initiatives, then I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Monteleone here. The first initiative I want to talk about is our Titan program, which the Secretary also mentioned this morning. And the Titan program, in an overly simplistic way, is our ability to ingest sensor data and service that sensor data to a customer, whether that's a sensor-to-shooter thread, whether that's intelligence preparation, any sensing, any sensor delivered to a customer. And so you can imagine that's a very difficult task, right? How do I take all this sensing information and deliver something meaningful to, I love how the G2 mentioned this, to an already overworked and fatigued analyst looking for something specific in a whole lot of data. And so a couple of initiatives that we have in the Titan program. Firstly, is we are taking AI and ML algorithms very seriously, so seriously that I'm establishing a separate dedicated program focused on sensor data and the software specific to how we process and deliver answers to questions around that sensor data. That's really important to understand because the Titan program offers more opportunities to industry than just delivering a truck that has a bunch of antennas that ingest sensor. No, this is a software program that has opportunities for industry around the many different modalities of sensor technologies. And really, the ability for us to process this sensor data is a core foundational element to us seeing far and sensing far and assessing that information that we see and sense far. So first initiative is establishing an AI/ML pipeline specific to our sensor data. And the second initiative is to ensure that this Titan program remains a software program. So as we're delivering this capability, we don't sit back and say we've answered the question of sensor data. Our sensor data and our future environments are so dynamic that we've got to continue investing and delivering a Titan program for the future. And so that is a challenge for both me as a PEO and industry writ large, is how do we continue to see far as our environment changes extremely dynamically over months, years, and getting out to the Army 2030 is going to look very, very different tomorrow than it does today. And so those two initiatives are two that I really wanted to highlight in our foundational sensing program, which is Titan. As the G2 mentioned, as General Potter mentioned, we have sensing deep programs across the many layers of our portfolio. And the other initiative that I wanted to highlight here is our high altitude and space sensing portfolio. And so we're delivering sensor and asking industry, challenging industry around how we can deliver sensors in a high altitude platform. So many of you have heard of the Hades program, where we're delivering sensing technology on a business jet. You've heard of programs in high altitude above 60,000 feet and how we can get after stratospheric sensing technologies, and then how we build sensor technologies that are resilient to this future environment. And so that's what I wanted to conclude on and hand off to my partner here, Mr. Monteleone, is we have a lot of investments in building resilient sensing technology to this future environment. So technologies centered around NAVWAR, assured PNT, and our ability to have trusted space and trusted sensors in our future architecture is really critical. And our partnership with Army Futures Command, defining that future environment for not just 2024, but for the Army of 2030 is critical, so that we're seeing what that future sensing architecture will look like. So Mr. Monteleone, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I think you need a microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Kitts. Hey, good afternoon. Mike Monteleone here. I'm the Assured Positioning, Navigation, and Timing and Space Cross-Functional Team Director. It's really an honor to be able to talk with all of you here today. So let me just make sure I make it crystal clear what my job is, right? My job is to align 4 major elements and coordinate across the massive Army enterprise, right? One is taking the concepts, our future operating concepts, and driving towards that next concept by aligning requirements, and I'll talk about that in a moment here, technology, programmatics, as well as resources. And it's not so cut and dry that it's just one particular functional area of the Army that you hit at a time. I have to be an integrator as well, and I have to integrate across all those different spaces in order for us to deliver the capabilities of today. So in my portfolio, I have 3 main efforts. Mark just gave me a great lead off there. First, of course, is the short positioning, navigation, and timing. I say that way on purpose because they all have a massive impact on Army warfighting. Timing tends to be one of the most massive impacts across all the spaces, particularly what we're talking about in this particular Warriors Corner. The second one I have is navigation warfare, which is a subset of electronic warfare. So you have your electronic support, your electronic protect, your situational awareness components, and your electronic attack components there as well. And that's about us as the Blue Force being able to understand what we look like to the adversary, understand what the adversary may have to work against us, and then be able to protect our ability to use PNT and other capabilities, as well as deny the enemy their use of PNT. And last, I have the tactical space layer signature effort as well. And that's really what we're talking here today. It's being able to task assets, okay, space-based assets that could be owned by the government or commercial, be able to get that information as quickly as possible, either to the analyst that needs to see it, to a computer system that needs to view it, or to advanced analytics, AI or ML that need to do something at machine speed to be able to inform our commanders to make decisions at machine speed. So it's really exciting because in each one of those 3 spaces, I currently have requirements, approved Army requirements on the books right now that allow us to experiment and to prototype with our partners here at a very rapid pace. And this year in Project Convergence 22, you're going to start seeing some of those technologies out there being evaluated as Army capabilities, which is incredibly exciting. But I also have the role of helping Army Futures Command design that Army of 2040. So we're looking beyond, all the way out beyond 2030 into 2040. And that's going to be incredibly important for us to get after what I've seen many of you here on the floor today talking about modular open systems architectures, the ability to rapidly bring capabilities into our enterprise, and to be able to take advantage of those at rapid speeds without massive 10-year, 15, 20-year acquisition cycles. So really exciting time to be in this position. I'm really honored to be here. I do want to say that it's a team of teams. So, we have our Army staff integrator here in this particular space, the Army G2, which is fantastic, along with our friends at the ISR Task Force and my PEO teammate here, Mr. Kitts. It really takes a team of teams, but it's not just within the United States Army. And I just wanted to touch on, Army, and I think many of you know this, but Army is the biggest user, biggest consumer of space capabilities. So we have to be partnered with those that are in the space business. So 2 big partnerships I want to make sure everybody knows that we're involved with. One, we're closely partnered with the intelligence community, and secondly, we're also closely partnered with U.S. Space Force, and we're doing joint development efforts with the Space Development Agency, and we're looking forward to evaluating some future prototype experimental capabilities in the near future. So with that said, I appreciate everybody's time here today, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Miller.
Awesome. So again, one of the nice things about going last is I get to take all of their high points and then sort of put them together. So the name of the Warriors Corner was relevant deep sensing at the edge. And I'm going to focus in on 3 of those words: relevant, deep, edge. Left the sensing part out, because sensing is what we do as an intel core. We sense and we make sense. But the relevant, the deep, and the edge are all squishy. They don't mean anything unless we actually apply meaning, unless we actually operationalize them. So let's talk about it. So why do we sense? Why is it relevant? So we're trying to understand the enemy, we're trying to understand ourselves, and we're trying to understand the terrain, right? Red, blue, green. And then what's deep? So deep, we normally say it's far. Well, there's also a breadth of sensing that's depth. There's a time in sensing. So we understand actually how we're going to array the sensing. And then there's a depth in how we partner to sense. So as we think about the concept of joint all-domain command and control, another squishy term, what we really mean is who has what asset? Joint. Where is that asset? Multi-domain. And who controls that asset, and what are they going to do with it? Command and control. So as we think about what relevant deep sensing at the edge is, we are thinking about how to combine all of those concepts into something that we can operationalize, because what we might find is that all of the space assets are great right up until they're not. Which means that we, the Army, have to have organic capabilities. The maritime component has to have organic capabilities. We know that we have to have sensors on the network. We know that we have to have sensors on the battlefield. We have to have long-range sensors in terms of long-range reconnaissance as well as long-range surveillance. We know that we have to get the data back from every IVAS. We have to get the data back from all the telemetry coming off of vehicles, and we still have to make sense of it. That's the edge part. So it's not just putting more pixels onto a screen, because all of us have stared at pixels for a long time. It's what is the composition and disposition? What do we think that we're sensing? Why are we sensing? What are we going to do with the data that we sensed? And that's where we need help, because there's so much data. Everything that we collect is pixels, it's RF, it's tweets, it's text, it's everything. And we have to make sense of it in a meaningful way. And we have to do that in a way that's protected and that's meaningful for our analysts, because I know that every day at 1800 in Afghanistan, we had all of our multinational partners sitting there, and we had to figure out who's doing what to whom next. And it wasn't, hey, oh, now we're going to go figure it out, is who's doing what to whom next. So as we talk about relevant deep sensing at the edge, what I would impart to industry and our multinational partners and our allies and academia and the other components of the Army is we have to figure out where all that data is coming from, where depth is in distance, breadth, and time, and you have to help us figure out what to do with it so that we can tell you where do we think the enemy is, how do we think they're arrayed, what do we think their intent is, and what can we do about it, because it's not always kinetic. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open it up from questions, and the only way that this works for all of us is that if you ask questions, because otherwise we can high five and we can get off stage, but then we haven't actually helped anybody. So what I would do is just open it up for questions from anybody in the audience. Someone's coming with a microphone.
Thank you. I'm Teresa Hitchens with Breaking Defense, and I have a question about the tactical space layer. Could you elaborate on what technologies might be tested in Project Convergence 2022 from that layer? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. There's two components here. So there's actually what's in space that the Army has worked to, and then there's how we use it again. So under the assured position, navigation, and timing, they're working with multiple prototype systems. And quite frankly, that relates to what the ISR task force is working on in terms of the tactical intelligence targeting access node Titan. So we are actually trying to operationalize the entire sensor to processor to C2 to shooter complex. Now, there's a bunch of big words, so what I do is break them down. So the sensors, we'll have sensors everywhere. We'll have all the space apparatus. The processor is where we normally don't add enough value. So processing, what we're doing there is how do we bring the data down? How do we either apply an automated process using some of the artificial intelligence, machine learning that Mr. Kitts talked about, and then how do you move it out to the next step in that chain? So we're going to exercise that entire joint collaborative kill web as part of Project Convergence 22. It's very weird. I don't know if I'm yelling or not. There's got to be more. Yes. I think there's going over there one.
Okay, so my question, and I'm just a grunt. My question is, all this information, all this sensing information, you're going to get overload. You have a bunch of stuff that you need, but you have even more that's just fat. How do you get rid of the fat? In a grunt kind of way.
Do you want me to jump on this? Do you want to jump on it?
No, you
I-
have
I-
something.
no,
You want
I love
to-
this.
no.
No, please, Alex.
So we're actually, Mr. Bang, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisitions, Logistics, and Technology, is hosting a digital transformation set of panels tomorrow morning. We're actually going to talk about this. I hope nobody throws anything at me. We don't have a data problem. You're 100% correct. We have a what do we do with the data problem. So this is where all of the processors that we're working as part of that kill web, this is where intelligence analysts really make their money, really make sure that we're scoped in correctly. And this is where I rely heavily on the acquisition team and the prototyping team to figure out what those workflows are to automate that. Because you're right, there's tons of pixels that we'll never look at because they weren't collected in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think it highlights our acquisition approach that we've had over the last year, which is how do we get the user in way earlier than we had previously, so we understand how they're going to cognitively look at data, how are they going to cognitively use the software applications and software tools we're going to give them. And so we've changed our model a little bit to allow the users to have a vote in how the systems are actually being developed and delivered, so we can identify some of these challenges way up front. But absolutely right. I'd echo everything Alex said about having what are we going to do with the data problem here? Absolutely. Thanks for your question.
Gentlemen, Dave Hammerschmidt with Turbine One. You talked about processing at the edge, but historically the edge has only been to battalion headquarters. How much farther are you looking to go? Because realistically speaking, we all know that the decisive point in battles is going to be soldiers and combat platforms on the battlefield.
So I think how we service data and how the customer is still something we're working towards, right? I'd still say the battalion's probably still the answer today. How we're going to be able to service that, how we're going to leverage some of these technologies is one of the challenges that we're putting out to industry, right? This critical integration with our network. How is our network architecture going to support some of us servicing data, right? Because today we're not going to be servicing data. We're going to be servicing product. We're going to be servicing assessments, right? And so I think it's hand in glove with our network community and understanding what is the art of the possible industry can do with this glut of data ingest that we're going to have, and then how we execute some of these threads. And then at PC22, we've got a lot of threads that are exercising sort of how do we share this information, how do we disseminate some of this data in a way that our applications can do it much more smartly without giving you my data problem, right? I don't want to give my customer a data problem. I want to give them an answer, or I want to give them a product. I think a lot of that's what we're prototyping in PC22 as well.
So great question, and similar to the question from the gentleman here in the front row, that's the key part about soldier-centered design. And that's where we have to iterate, because we've learned things that not everybody needs everything all the time. Not everybody needs everything as exquisite as every echelon all the time. And perhaps when something is figured out based upon that data source, it could be simply translated into a message instead of some movie or video, a picture, a high-res picture. It might just be, a green light or something like that. But in some cases, but the whole thing is why we do soldier touch points and iterate on them. So you don't just do them once and say we're done. And that's really the big thing behind the requirements. When we do an abbreviated CDD, that just kicks off that prototyping phase, and soldier touch points are intentionally inserted and peppered throughout there so we continue to iterate. And we also find too is some units, depending on what those units may need that information for, may need it in a different way as well. And I think that's really critical, and I'm glad Mr. Kitts touched on the network piece of this, because not just the transport piece, which a lot of people is like, how am I getting it to you? But the data environment, right? This data-centric environment is what's going to truly enable that type of capability. So that's really a great question. Thank you.
So I'm the science guy. So that space vehicle's the edge, that gimbal's the edge, Matt from my team back there is the edge, Colonel Benini back there he's the edge. The edge is everywhere. So our challenge is, what do we do at the edge? Or how do we get people to consume things at the edge in a meaningful way? Because right now, the Army owns and operates 250,000 vehicles, right? That's every Toyota Hilux to every, even new the M1, A2, SEP V4. So those are the edge, but we know they're not all equipped to be the edge. We know that they're not going to process there, because the last thing that I want to do is give another soldier another lightweight piece of kit that is going to burn them because the processor is so hot. So the edge is everywhere. We're just trying to figure out, to Mr. Kitts and Mr. Monteleone's point, what do we do that's meaningful? Because otherwise, we'll just get more dots, and more dots don't mean good dots.
Hi, guys. Shank, Camdenia, Red River. They all know me. At which point do you make these things, these capabilities that you're talking about, actual products or product sets that get spun out into a program of record, and and we go to the LRIP and then the POR process? Because there's a lot of experimentation and capability sets, but not a lot of bigger things.
So I'll start and maybe go over to you. So good to see you, as always. No, a great question, right? And that's really, so when I talked about those abbreviated CDDs, those requirements allow us to start moving out very rapidly on that experimentation and prototyping phase. But we might not know exactly what that future capability is going to end up being, and or whether that becomes multiple programs of record. Maybe it's a modification to a current. Maybe it's an evolution of something that's out there. Or maybe, you know what, as you start prototyping and you start experimenting, you realize that's not delivering the capability perhaps we thought it might. And then we have to make those decisions, right? But that's the whole thing is, as a community, as an enterprise, as we go through this together. We go through those experiments together. And we also bring in, very early on, our T&E community. And we bring in, again, all of our requirements developers, including our .mil PFP components across the enterprise. And that really teaches us a whole lot, especially if it's, so we're in a material world right here. But all of those other pieces, do we have to actually change what a soldier's job is? Do we have to reorganize a part of the Army to do that? Do we have to, I mean, when you think about that, when you get to the people part, that's when the cost, not just in dollars, but the cost really starts going up. And to me, that's one of the key things. So we take into account all those factors before anything. I think your question was, how do you make that determination of whether it's a program of record? I mean, when we bring that to Army senior leaders, we kind of have to shape that whole piece of it with a recommendation and allow that decision to be made at the Army level. So, Mark, I don't know if you agree with that, but.
Yeah, I'd give you two tangible examples. First, PC-22, we have the Titan pre-prototype there, integrating our space data capabilities. That will be a precursor to our Titan program, so that before we get into LRIP, we have that soldier input from the MDTF that will then inform how we get into a more production phase, if you will. And then another example is Hades. We've got Ares and Artemis capability, prototyping that capability now. So as we go into the program of record, we're not learning lessons, we're delivering capability. And so those are two tangible examples. And I think it shows the Army's commitment to building out these prototypes and then getting to a production, getting to a predictable program of record beyond that. So I really appreciate that question. Thanks.
Hello, Derek Edwards from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Just a quick question for each of you. What was success for me when I provided comm as an E4 in 1994? That success is not the same as when I was a W4, late in my career. Further today, some of the same problems we're trying to find solutions. I think anybody under this roof could provide a solution to kind of get after a lot of what's important to you. My question, though, is what defines success in each of your areas today? Because I can sense your problems, but I'm interested to know what defines success in your areas.
Well, I'll go first since I'm holding the microphone here. For me, what defines success is delivering a capability that our warfighter is going to leverage and use. And for me, it's pretty simple as a material person to sort of say that. However, I think our challenge as we go to 2030 is our environments that we're going to operate in are very different. Whether that's around the world, whether that's RF, whether that's any of these environments are just changing so dynamically, right? And we're learning that today. 6 months ago, the world looked a very different place than it does today. And so for me, it's architecting our programs to ensure that we can adapt that measure of success differently, right? So that we're not saying something for today is going to work for 2030, that my solutions are going to be adaptable as we deliver to that warfighter.
Hey, thanks and great question. So I mentioned that the CFT that I lead begins with assured. And I always think about that, say assured means it's always there. But we know if you have a single solution, it's going to be really, really hard in the future. And it's really, really hard now, but it's going to get even worse and worse to say assured. So now we start using that R word, resilient. And then really, what does that mean? So can I provide that? And I think this is along the lines of what Mr. Kitts was talking about as well, is can I have that overall integrated environment available to the soldier at the timeliness they need it, to be able to trust that it's giving them what they need, and in a lot of ways, all the problems that it's dealing with, it's transparent to that soldier. And I think that's really the key thing. We often talk about primary, alternate, contingency, emergency pace. I think the last panel probably talked about auto pace and things like that. I had come from the comms world and networking world before this, and I've been rethinking that problem set here in the PNT environment and saying, hey, is it really about A, B, C switches for different solutions, or is it about fused capabilities and me getting as much as possible? So resiliency through diversity or something like that of different capabilities. And I think that's one approach. And I think that's why I mentioned before, I think these modular open systems, both on the hardware side of things, but also on the software side of things, to rapidly be able to churn and turn and add capability that's threat informed is going to be key to the future. But that's a great question. I appreciate that. Alex, over to you.
I'll answer with an anecdote, keep it short. February of 2018, I was sitting in Kabul with Task Force Lightning, and the S2 Chops spent 8 hours putting together the ISR sync matrix for the next day. And she was exceptionally good at her job. And the next morning it started to sleet. So everything that was basically east of Task Force Southwest was scrubbed. She wasted her entire day because we didn't have a repeatable process in place to swap out all of the technology. The sensing was not a problem for that theater, for that use case, but how we were able to employ the technology was a problem. And it's not as simple as just saying, oh, I need a sync matrix. Oh, I need a collection management tool. It was every piece of it. How is that fed by my joint partners? How is that fed by my coalition partners? How do I feed that back out? How do I task things from that? How do I get tasks to it? Because the last thing that we want is in 2030, an analyst has to look at a spreadsheet. So it's not the technology on this one. Success for me is setting up a repeatable process so that I can go do my job in Tech Scout.
Hi, I'm Martin from an industry partner, PicoGrid. You mentioned that you want to make and keep Titan a software project or software program, right? But in the last couple of years, there's been the narrative in the public that the defense industrial base has a certain lack of capabilities when it comes to software. Do you think we have addressed that gap? And if not, how do you think we will deliver on that vision?
It was very difficult to hear. I think you were asking, with the reduction in defense industrial base, how are we incentivizing non-traditional or traditional software vendors to integrate into Titan? And so a few things that we're doing. I think the bottom line is we need to do more. We need to do more. We need to do more, right? I think we've not necessarily been successful in attracting as many non-traditional software vendors as we would have liked. One of the things that we're doing is trying to segregate or productize the Titan program so that I can incentivize industry to deliver product rather than an entire integrated set of software. And so I think that's part of the future of Titan is where we have a certain problem set, we can go after targeted capabilities to integrate. But absolutely, you know, we've done OTAs to try to attract non-traditionals, and we're going to continue to do all of that. We have to continue to do all of that. It's a great question. In fact, a question I get very often. I am very motivated to continue to do it, but to be honest, to candid with you, we're not where I think we want to be yet. Alex, I don't know if you wanted to jump in.
That's about 5 years ago, we said, hey, everything needs to go to cloud, and we got it. We just didn't invest in cloud. So now a lot of industry says, hey, my startup costs are a lot lower if I can actually build and put my entire DSO pipeline in a cloud, and Titan's not the cloud. So what we're now finding out is we actually have to write and design software and do the digital engineering for the edge, the hard edge, the edge that will be dull and dirty and disconnected so that it can synchronize and replicate with a cloud. I'm using that very abstractly, regardless of whose cloud that is or where it is or what classification level it is or what other joint partners might be a part of it. We're trying to bridge that gap.
Good afternoon. Dan Moore, CGI Federal. In addition to Titan and the Hades program, what other 1 or 2 programs would you say you would want industry to pay attention to over the next 12 to 24 months in order to help you get at this problem set?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll throw it over to you. So, Dan, good to see you again. Thanks for the question. I think the challenge to industry is how do we sense deep, not what program we're in, right? And so I think my door's always open, right? And I want to hear from industry, right? We have programs like terrestrial layer sensors. We have high altitude programs. These are meant to just be conduits for industry to come in with an idea or a capability that you think may be viable. And in my partnership with Mr. Marleone and the ISR task force, we've now proven this rapid ability to get to a requirement, to get to a prototype. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah. Dan, good to see you again. It's been a while. Hey, just to echo what Mr. Kitt said, just as an example, you know, we talk about high altitude platforms, right? And bridging between an aerial layer and space. And that might be a very interesting thing for the United States Army. So I'm very interested of thoughts on payload capabilities, right? Regardless of platform, but payload capabilities that might be multifunction, right? That have a particular function, but also maybe could communicate or can thicken a particular network or whatever it might be. I think that's really an interesting area that industry can churn on. And right now I think is a really good time for us for the government, for the United States Army to get informed on what industry may have available or what they think's in the realm of the future. But thanks, Dan. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'll give a non-intel answer. Multifunction radar for the future vertical lift because it's multifunction and we can be greedy and we can leverage it. Anything that allows the next generation combat vehicle or the robotic combat vehicle because that is a small form factor power bank that has to operate disconnected. So anything that can enable those platforms to sense, because it's not just Intel sensors that we're going after, it's all sensors, and how do we connect those across all domains? Those are really important because eventually we want to make sure that we can provide them with target warnings and that we can get information from them. And I think we got the 30-second warning for everybody that isn't looking backwards. So I want to say thank you very much, gentlemen, as always. Ma'am, thank you so much. Please give a round of applause for Mr. Monteleone and Mr. Kitts.